The grand halls of Castle Evermore echoed with excitement as servants bustled about, preparing for the royal engagement celebration. Prince Adrian of Westoria paced in his chambers, adjusting his ceremonial uniform for the 10th time. His betrothal to Princess Elara of the neighboring kingdom of Easthold promised to end generations of border conflicts and unite two powerful realms. "Your Highness, please stand still," his valet implored, trying to secure the royal sash across Adrian's chest. Adrian sighed, gazing out the window toward the eastern mountains. "A marriage of convenience, sealed by royal decree before we'd even met. Is this truly to be my fate, Frederick?" Frederick, who had served the prince since childhood, offered a sympathetic smile. "Many royal marriages begin as duty, Your Highness, yet grow into something more. Princess Elara is said to be both beautiful and kind." "So I've heard," Adrian murmured, though his thoughts were elsewhere, specifically with Lyra, the quiet, dark-haired maid who had been assigned to his chambers 3 months ago. The same maid whose gentle laughter made his heart race, whose intelligent observations during their late-night conversations had captivated him completely. Little did the kingdom know that behind the facade of the perfect royal engagement lurked a forbidden love that threatened everything. The great hall of Castle Evermore blazed with light from 1,000 candles as nobility from both kingdoms gathered for the formal introduction of Prince Adrian and Princess Elara. Elaborate tapestries depicting the intertwined histories of Westoria and Easthold hung from the vaulted ceilings, a visual reminder of what this union symbolized. Adrian stood tall beside his father, King Darian, as trumpets announced the arrival of the Easthold delegation. The massive doors swung open to reveal King Thaddeus, Queen Meredith, and between them, Princess Elara. Even Adrian had to admit she was stunning. Golden hair cascaded down her back in elaborate braids interwoven with pearls. Her gown, the color of the summer sky, complemented eyes that shone with intelligence and was that apprehension. "Her Royal Highness, Princess Elara of Easthold," the royal herald announced. The princess approached with perfect poise, her steps measured and graceful. When she curtsied before Adrian, he bowed in return, taking her gloved hand and bringing it to his lips as protocol demanded. "It is my honor to formally welcome you to Westoria, Princess," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed hall. "The honor is mine, Prince Adrian," she replied, her voice melodic but carefully controlled. "I look forward to our future together." As Adrian rose, their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, he sensed something unexpected. Not love, certainly, but perhaps a fellow prisoner of duty. The festivities continued long into the night. Adrian danced with Elara, made polite conversation with Easthold nobles, and played every part of the devoted prince-to-be. Yet his eyes continually drifted to the servants moving discreetly around the edges of the hall, searching for Lyra. When he finally spotted her refilling wine goblets at the far table, their gazes locked for just an instant. The longing in her eyes mirrored his own, a silent acknowledgement of what could never be. Later, as the castle settled into night and guests retired to their chambers, Adrian dismissed his valet early. "I need some time alone," he insisted, though Frederick's knowing look suggested he wasn't fooled. An hour passed before a soft knock came at the servant's entrance to his chambers. Lyra slipped inside, still in her maid's uniform, her dark hair now loose around her shoulders. "This is madness," she whispered, even as she moved into his waiting arms. "The castle is full of Easthold nobility." If anyone discovered, Adrian silenced her with a kiss. "For tonight, there is no prince, no maid, just us." "But the princess," Lyra protested weakly, "she seems kind, Adrian." "The guilt of this deception, I never asked for this arrangement," Adrian said, leading her toward the massive royal bed. "My heart was claimed long before diplomats decided my future." As moonlight spilled through the tall windows, casting silver patterns across the royal chambers, they surrendered to feelings that defied the rigid boundaries of their stations. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of engagement celebrations and diplomatic meetings. Adrian dutifully escorted Princess Elara through gardens and galleries, attended state dinners at her side, and gradually discovered that he genuinely enjoyed her company. She was well-read, with a sharp wit and progressive ideas about governance that surprised him. "The eastern provinces have suffered 3 poor harvests," she told him during one of their afternoon walks through the castle grounds. "Yet your father's tax collectors demand the same tribute." Adrian frowned. I wasn't aware. The council reports claim all regions are prospering. Perhaps your council sees what it wishes to see, Elara suggested carefully. In Easthold, I regularly traveled with my father to the outlying villages. People speak truth when their king comes to them, rather than sending representatives. Her insights were valuable, her compassion evident. In another life, Adrian thought, they might have made good friends, perhaps even good partners. But his heart remained with Lyra, who now had the impossible task of serving as one of Princess Elara's attendants. The precariousness of their situation became devastatingly clear one night when Lady Cordelia, Princess Elara's sharp-eyed chaperone, nearly caught Lyra leaving Adrian's chambers before dawn. "You there, girl?" Lady Cordelia's voice had cut through the dim corridor. "What business have you in the royal wing at this hour?" Lyra had curtsied deeply, her face downcast. "Delivering fresh towels for Prince Adrian's morning ablutions, my lady." The housekeeper insisted they couldn't wait. Lady Cordelia's suspicious gaze had lingered, but with no evidence of impropriety, she could only huff and wave Lyra away. "That was too close," Adrian whispered to Lyra when they managed a brief moment alone in an alcove later that day. "Perhaps we should be more careful, at least until after the diplomatic contingent returns to Easthold." "More careful?" Lyra's dark eyes flashed. "Adrian, we aren't being careful at all. We're being reckless with not just our futures, but the future of two kingdoms." The truth of her words stung, but before they could speak further, a page appeared seeking Adrian for an urgent council meeting. That evening, as Adrian prepared to dine privately with Princess Elara for the first time, a note was delivered to his chambers: "Your secret has been observed. Meet in the East Garden near the stone bench at midnight if you wish to avoid public scandal." Adrian's blood ran cold. He burned the note immediately, watching the ashes scatter in the fireplace. Someone knew about Lyra, but who? And what did they want? The dinner with Elara proceeded with Adrian distracted, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. The princess, perceptive as always, noticed his preoccupation. "You seem troubled tonight, Prince Adrian," she said, setting down her wine goblet. "Is there something weighing on your mind?" For a wild moment, he considered telling her everything, confessing his relationship with Lyra, explaining that while he respected Elara, his heart belonged elsewhere. But the diplomatic implications were too severe. This marriage was not about their personal happiness but the peace between two kingdoms that had shed blood for generations. "Merely council matters," he lied, forcing a smile. "Border disputes in the western provinces." Elara studied him for a moment longer, then nodded, though her eyes suggested she didn't quite believe him. At midnight, Adrian slipped from his chambers and made his way to the East Garden, hand resting on the dagger concealed beneath his cloak. The moon hung full and bright, illuminating the sculpted hedges and stone pathways. The figure waiting at the bench was not what he expected. It was Princess Elara herself, wrapped in a simple cloak that concealed her fine gown. "You?" Adrian halted several paces away. "You sent the note?" Elara's gaze was steady. "I did." "How did you discover your affair with my maid?" Elara finished for him. "I'm more observant than people realize, Adrian. It's a skill one develops when one's life is constantly on display." Adrian's mind raced. Would she demand he end things with Lyra? Report their indiscretion to both kings? Insist on returning to Easthold, fracturing the alliance before it was sealed? Instead, Elara rose and approached him with measured steps. "I'm not here to threaten or expose you, Adrian." "Then why summon me like this?" Her laugh was soft, tinged with something like sadness. "Because I, too, have secrets. Because I understand what it means to love someone you aren't supposed to love." Adrian's confusion must have shown on his face. "In Easthold," Elara continued, "I have someone. A royal guard named Matthias. We've loved each other since childhood, but as I grew older and my father began negotiating marriage alliances, we knew our time was limited." "I don't understand," Adrian said. "Why tell me this?" "Because I think we might help each other." Elara's voice grew stronger. "This marriage is necessary for our kingdoms. Too much blood has been spilled over the decades. But perhaps the marriage need only be political, not personal. Adrian stared at her, scarcely believing what she seemed to be suggesting. I mean we marry as planned, present the united front our people need, but allow each other the freedom to follow our hearts in private. Discretion would be paramount, of course. Heirs would eventually be necessary, but many royal couples manage such arrangements. The proposal was stunning in its pragmatism. You would agree to such a marriage? Knowing from the beginning it would be a facade. Elara's smile held no bitterness. All royal marriages are facades of one kind or another, Adrian. At least ours would be honest between us. As they talked further into the night, a peculiar friendship began to form, one built on shared understanding and mutual respect for each other's hearts. For several weeks, Adrian believed they had found an impossible solution. He and Elara continued their public courtship, winning the approval of both courts with their apparent compatibility. In private, they became genuine friends, sharing confidences and sometimes laughing at the elaborate performance they maintained for the benefit of their kingdoms. When they could manage it safely, Adrian still met with Lyra, who was both relieved and wary about the arrangement with Elara. She's been kind to me, Lyra admitted one evening as they walked through the secluded part of the royal forest, disguised as a hunter and his wife. Kinder than I deserve, given the circumstances. She understands love, Adrian replied. In another world, I think you two might have been friends. Lyra gave him a skeptical look. A princess and a maid? Even your progressive thinking has limits, my prince. What none of them had accounted for was Lady Cordelia's persistent suspicion. The chaperone had been watching Lyra closely since the early morning encounter, noting her comings and goings, timing her errands, and observing her interactions with the prince. The betrayal, when it came, was swift and brutal. Adrian was in a council meeting with his father and the Easthold diplomats when the doors burst open and Lady Cordelia strode in, dragging a pale-faced Lyra by the arm. Forgive the intrusion, your majesties, she announced, her voice ringing with righteous indignation, but I believe this matter cannot wait. This servant girl has been discovered in Prince Adrian's bed chambers on multiple occasions at inappropriate hours. I have witnesses who will testify to inappropriate intimacy between them. The room fell deadly silent. Adrian felt the blood drain from his face as his father rose slowly from his throne. What is the meaning of this? King Darian's voice was dangerous, quiet. Before Adrian could speak, King Thaddeus of Easthold slammed his fist on the table. Is this how Westoria honors its commitments? With the prince debasing himself with a common servant while courting our daughter? Father, please, Adrian began, but the Easthold king cut him off. Silence. We came here in good faith, offering our most precious treasure, our only daughter, to seal a lasting peace. And this is how the heir to Westoria repays that trust. Lyra stood trembling, her eyes downcast as nobles from both kingdoms stared at her with a mixture of disgust and fascination. Adrian wanted nothing more than to go to her, to shield her from their judgment, but such an action would only confirm the accusations. Take the girl to the dungeons, King Darian ordered, his voice like ice. We will determine her punishment after we've addressed this diplomatic disaster. No. Adrian stepped forward, but royal guards moved to block his path. Father, she's innocent, then explain why she was found in your chambers this very morning, Lady Cordelia interjected, hiding behind your dressing screen when your valet entered. All eyes turned to Adrian, awaiting his explanation. The truth would implicate him fully, but a lie would condemn Lyra alone. Before he could speak, the doors opened again, and Princess Elara entered. She surveyed the scene with remarkable composure, her gaze moving from her furious father to the accused maid to Adrian's desperate face. I can explain this situation, she announced, her voice steady. King Thaddeus turned to his daughter. You need not dirty yourself with this matter, Elara. Return to your chambers while we sort out this betrayal. I must speak, father, Elara insisted, because I instructed Lyra to be in Prince Adrian's chambers. A collective gasp rippled through the council room. You what? Lady Cordelia sputtered. As my personal maid, Lyra has been helping me prepare a surprise for Prince Adrian, Elara continued smoothly. A traditional Easthold blessing ritual for our engagement. It requires certain items to be placed in specific locations within the bridegroom's chambers. I asked her to be discreet, as the ritual is meant to be revealed only when completed. Adrian stared at Elara, amazed by both her quick thinking and her willingness to lie to protect them. Is this true? King Darian demanded, looking from Elara to Lyra. Lyra, catching on quickly, nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. Princess Elara has been instructing me in the ritual. I was placing blessed stones beneath His Highness's bed when the valet arrived unexpectedly. I hid, fearing the surprise would be ruined. Lady Cordelia wasn't satisfied. That doesn't explain the other occasions when she was seen entering or leaving the prince's chambers at suspicious hours. My ritual requires observance of certain celestial alignments, Elara replied without hesitation. Some preparations must be made at specific hours of the night. I would have performed them myself, but it would be most improper for me to enter my betrothed's bedchamber before our wedding. The explanation was elaborate but plausible enough to cast doubt on Lady Cordelia's accusations. King Thaddeus, though still frowning, seemed somewhat mollified by his daughter's explanation. Release the girl, King Darian finally ordered, though his suspicious gaze lingered on Adrian. But she is to be reassigned away from the royal chambers immediately. Princess Elara will need to select a different maid for her rituals. Of course, Your Majesty, Elara agreed with a perfect curtsy. As the council gradually dispersed, crisis temporarily averted, Adrian caught Elara's eye across the room. Her slight nod communicated everything. She had saved them this time, but the danger had only increased. Later that evening, when Adrian finally managed to speak privately with Elara in the palace library, his gratitude was overwhelming. You risked everything to protect us, he said quietly, making sure they couldn't be overheard. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet, Elara replied, her cheerful public demeanor replaced by serious concern. Lady Cordelia wasn't convinced, and now they'll be watching all of us more closely. Lyra has been reassigned to the kitchens, where she'll be under constant supervision. Can we still proceed with our arrangement after the wedding? Adrian asked. Elara hesitated. I'm not certain. This incident has made my father suspicious. He's suggesting we accelerate the wedding timeline and return to Easthold immediately afterward. The implications hit Adrian like a physical blow. You would be taking Lyra to Easthold? No, Elara said gently. My father has forbidden any of the staff involved in today's misunderstanding from joining my household. Lyra must remain here. Adrian closed his eyes, the reality of their situation crashing down around him. Their careful plan was unraveling, and the consequences would separate him from Lyra indefinitely. There must be another way, he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. Elara placed a compassionate hand on his arm. Perhaps there is. But finding it will require courage from all of us and sacrifice. The accelerated wedding preparations left little time for private meetings. Adrian was constantly surrounded by advisors, tailors, or diplomats, while Lyra was kept far from the royal apartments, her new position in the kitchens ensuring she worked from before dawn until late evening. Princess Elara, meanwhile, seemed to throw herself into the wedding preparations with unexpected enthusiasm, charming the Westorian court with her grace and apparent devotion to Adrian. Only he knew that her cheerful efficiency masked a deeper plan forming in her mind. 3 days before the wedding, a royal hunt was organized to honor the Easthold nobles. As the hunting party assembled in the castle courtyard, Adrian was surprised when Elara requested to ride alongside him rather than with the other ladies. Are you certain, Princess? He asked as attendants helped her mount a spirited mare. The terrain can be challenging. Elara's smile held a hint of mischief. I've been riding since before I could walk, Prince Adrian. The ladies' viewing pavilion holds little appeal for me. Once the hunting party entered the forest and spread out in pursuit of various game, Elara guided her horse closer to Adrian's and spoke in a low voice. I've arranged for us to become separated from the main party, she explained. When we reach the fork by the ancient oak, follow me left instead of right. I have someone meeting us. Adrian raised an eyebrow but nodded. When they reached the mentioned fork, Elara signaled subtly, and they veered away from the others, riding deeper into the less frequented part of the forest. After 20 minutes of careful navigation through dense woodland, they reached a small clearing where a cloaked figure waited beside a sturdy horse. When the figure lowered its hood, Adrian was shocked to see not Lyra, as he had expected, but a handsome young man in the uniform of an Easthold royal guard. Matthias, Elara said, her voice softening as she dismounted and embraced him. Adrian realized this must be her secret love, somehow smuggled into Westoria without the knowledge of either court. The obvious risk she'd taken to arrange this meeting spoke volumes about her determination. After introducing the men, Elara wasted no time. We have perhaps an hour before our absence becomes suspicious. Here is what I propose. Her plan was audacious, dangerous, and possibly brilliant. As Adrian listened, his initial disbelief gave way to cautious hope. You understand what this would mean? Elara asked when she had finished outlining her idea. The personal cost would be significant for all of us. Adrian looked between Elara and Matthias, seeing the same blend of fear and resolve that he felt. Is there truly no other way? Not that allows all of us a chance at happiness, Elara replied. The alternative is to submit to our assigned roles and sacrifice our hearts for political expedience as royals have done for centuries. And Lyra? Have you discussed this with her? Not yet, Elara admitted. I couldn't risk approaching her directly with Lady Cordelia watching so closely. That's why I need your help for the next part. The plan required perfect timing, absolute secrecy, and the participation of a few trusted allies. Most crucially, it required Lyra's consent and her courage. That evening, Adrian sent his most trusted valet, Frederick, to deliver a sealed message to the kitchens. The message contained no names, no explicit references, merely a quote from a poem Adrian had once read to Lyra about stars choosing their own paths across the night sky, followed by a simple question: would you risk everything for a different destiny? The reply came before midnight, delivered by a young scullery maid who had befriended Lyra. On a small scrap of paper were written just 3 words: with all my heart. With Lyra's agreement secured, the wheels were set in motion. Over the next 2 days, as the castle buzzed with final wedding preparations, subtle arrangements were made, messages exchanged, and positions carefully established. The night before the wedding, traditional celebrations kept the castle occupied. Easthold nobles performed ceremonial dances in the Great Hall, while Westorian musicians played ancient songs symbolizing unity and prosperity. Amid the festivities, no one noticed certain servants making unusual preparations, or the brief, meaningful glances exchanged between key participants in the unfolding drama. Dawn broke on the wedding day with perfect, golden light streaming through stained glass windows. The castle was in controlled chaos as final arrangements were completed for what would be the most significant royal ceremony in a generation. Adrian stood in his chambers, allowing attendants to dress him in elaborate ceremonial robes, his face a mask of appropriate solemnity. When finally left alone for a moment of pre-ceremony reflection, he closed his eyes and whispered a prayer not for the diplomatic union about to take place, but for the success of their dangerous alternative plan. A soft knock at the door revealed Frederick, ostensibly delivering the royal signet ring for the ceremony. All is in readiness, Your Highness, he murmured, the double meaning clear. The eastern passage has been secured. Adrian nodded, slipping the ring onto his finger. And the princess? Awaiting your arrival in the chapel antechamber, as tradition dictates. The great cathedral of Westoria was filled to capacity with nobility from both kingdoms. As Adrian processed down the aisle, his father beaming with pride beside him, he caught the eye of Elara's handmaiden Julia, another confidant in their plan, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. When the trumpets sounded and Princess Elara appeared at the far end of the cathedral in a breathtaking gown of silver and blue, a collective gasp of admiration rose from the assembled guests. She was the perfect image of a royal bride, proceeding with dignity between her proud parents. The ceremony began with ancient prayers and traditional exchanges. The high priest of Westoria spoke eloquently about the union of 2 great houses, the healing of old wounds, the promise of peace. When it came time for the exchange of vows, Adrian took Elara's hands in his, looking into her eyes with genuine affection. not the love of a bridegroom, but the deep respect of a co-conspirator about to take an enormous risk together. I, Adrian of House Evermore, Prince of Westoria, take thee, Elara of House Solaris, Princess of Easthold. His vow was interrupted by a sudden commotion at the back of the cathedral. Heads turned as the massive doors burst open, and a royal messenger rushed in, face flushed with exertion. "Your Majesties," he cried, dropping to one knee before the royal dais. "Forgive the interruption, but I bring urgent news from the eastern border. Armed forces have been spotted massing near Falcon's Pass." Shocked murmurs rippled through the cathedral. King Thaddeus rose from his seat, face darkening. "What treachery is this? Our entire military leadership is here for the wedding." "It must be a mistake," King Darian insisted, though his hand had already moved to the ceremonial sword at his side. "The reports are confirmed, Your Majesty," the messenger continued. "Our scouts count at least 500 men, bearing unfamiliar banners." "Mercenaries," someone hissed from the Easthold delegation. In the confusion that followed, few noticed how calmly Princess Elara and Prince Adrian watched the unfolding chaos. As the kings and their advisors gathered to discuss this apparent threat, Elara squeezed Adrian's hand. "Now," she whispered. Adrian nodded to Frederick, who had positioned himself near a side door. The valet slipped away unnoticed as accusations began flying between the Westorian and Easthold nobles. "This wedding was a distraction," shouted an Easthold general. "Westoria planned to attack while our defenses were committed here." "Absurd," countered the Westorian chancellor. "Why would we attack when a peaceful union was moments from completion?" While attention focused on the escalating argument, Adrian leaned close to Elara. "It's time to transform a potential war into something better." With perfect composure, Elara stepped forward, her voice ringing clear above the angry voices. "Enough." The cathedral fell silent, stunned by the authority in the young princess's tone. "There are no forces at Falcon's Pass," she announced. "The messenger is part of a deception I orchestrated." Gasps and confused exclamations filled the sacred space. King Thaddeus stared at his daughter in disbelief. "Elara, what madness is this?" "Not madness, father," she replied steadily. "Clarity. Prince Adrian and I have come to understand something important about our kingdoms, and about ourselves." Adrian moved to stand beside her, presenting a united front despite the shocking turn of events. "What Princess Elara says is true. We arranged this interruption because we have a truth to share and a better proposal to make." The doors at the rear of the cathedral opened again. This time, Lyra entered, dressed not in kitchen rags but in a simple yet elegant blue gown. Beside her walked a tall man in the uniform of an Easthold Guard. Captain Matthias. Recognition dawned on King Thaddeus's face. "Captain Matthias? What is the meaning of this?" Elara's voice was firm as she addressed both kings and the assembled nobility. "The truth is this, Prince Adrian loves not me, but Lyra. And I love not the prince, but Captain Matthias. We have concealed these truths because we understand our duty to our kingdoms. But today, we ask you to consider a different path to peace." "This is outrageous!" Lady Cordelia shrieked. "I knew that Maid was." "Silence," King Darian commanded, his expression unreadable as he studied the four young people now standing together before the altar. "Let them speak." Adrian stepped forward. "For generations, our kingdoms have attempted to secure peace through royal marriages and diplomatic pacts, yet blood continues to be spilled along our borders. Perhaps it is time for a more radical approach. What my betrothed and I propose," Elara continued, "is not the union of two people who do not love each other, but the union of our kingdoms through shared governance. A council comprised of equal representatives from both Westoria and Easthold, working together to administer the disputed territories." "And what of your duties as heirs?" King Thaddeus demanded. "The succession must be secured." "I do not renounce my position as heir," Adrian clarified. "I ask only for the freedom to marry according to my heart, while still fulfilling my responsibilities to Westoria. Princess Elara makes the same request." "A commoner cannot be queen," one of the Westorian dukes objected, glaring at Lyra. Actually, Frederick interjected, stepping forward with an ancient leather-bound volume, there is precedent. During the reign of King Alaric III, a century and a half ago, the crown prince married a merchant's daughter. Their union was blessed by both church and state. The high priest, who had been listening intently, nodded slowly. The sacred texts do not forbid such unions. They speak only of the divine right to rule being passed through bloodlines which would continue through any children Prince Adrian might have, regardless of his consort's birth. For what seemed an eternity, the cathedral remained in tense silence as the two kings considered the extraordinary proposal before them. The diplomats and nobles waited, aware they were witnessing a potential reshaping of history. Finally, King Darian spoke. You arranged a false emergency, disrupted a sacred ceremony, and deceived both courts. His stern expression suddenly softened into something like reluctant admiration. The tactical thinking alone suggests you might indeed be worthy of ruling. King Thaddeus remained stone-faced. And you, daughter? You would choose a guard captain over a crown prince? I would choose love and honor both, father, Elara replied. Matthias has served our family loyally for years. His strategic mind and compassionate heart would make him a worthy consort. And the girl? King Darian's gaze fell on Lyra, who stood straight back despite the scrutiny of hundreds of noble eyes. Step forward. Lyra approached the royal dais and curtsied deeply. When she rose, her dark eyes met the king's without wavering. You love my son enough to risk everything? He asked. I love him enough to risk nothing, your majesty, Lyra answered. Had Prince Adrian asked, I would have walked away rather than endanger the peace between your kingdoms. It was the prince and princess who believed there might be a path that serves both the heart and the crown. Her honest answer seemed to strike a chord with the aging king. He turned to his counterpart from Easthold. Thaddeus, we have tried war. We have tried traditional alliance. Perhaps it is time to try something new. The negotiations that followed lasted hours, moving from the cathedral to the royal council chambers. By nightfall, a new agreement had been drafted, one that maintained the alliance between the kingdoms but reimagined its implementation. 1 month later, the great cathedral of Westoria once again filled with nobility from both kingdoms. This time, two couples stood before the high priest, Prince Adrian and Lyra, Princess Elara and Captain Matthias. The ceremony was unconventional but deeply moving. As the couples exchanged vows, the ancient enemies symbolized by the kings and their retinues stood together not in uneasy truce but in genuine celebration. When the high priest pronounced the unions blessed, cheers erupted throughout the cathedral, spreading to the common folk gathered in the square outside. Word of the unprecedented royal weddings had captured the imagination of both kingdoms, transforming a political arrangement into a story of love triumphant. At the wedding feast that followed, King Darian rose to offer a toast. Today marks not just the union of these courageous young people, but a new chapter in the history of our realms. The Council of United Territories convenes next week, with equal representation from both our kingdoms. King Thaddeus, mellowed perhaps by the joy radiating from his daughter, raised his goblet in agreement. To peace built not on convenience, but on truth. And to children brave enough to show their fathers a better way. Later that evening, as the celebrations continued, Adrian and Lyra slipped away to a quiet balcony overlooking the city. I still can't quite believe we're here, Lyra said, her simple golden circlet a gift from King Darian catching the moonlight. When Lady Cordelia dragged me before the court, I thought my life was over. Adrian drew her close. Instead, it was just beginning. For all of us. The path won't be easy, Lyra cautioned. There are still those who object to my position. They will learn, as my father did, that worth is not determined by birth. Adrian smiled. Besides, you've already won over half the court with your knowledge of agricultural improvements for the eastern provinces. Inside the great hall, they could see Elara and Matthias dancing, their movements perfectly synchronized after years of secret practice. She risked everything for us, Lyra mused. For love. For a vision of a better kingdom, Adrian corrected gently. Elara understood before any of us that real change requires both courage and compassion. As they stood together watching the stars emerge over a kingdom now united in more than name, Adrian reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them here from forbidden meetings in his royal chambers to a future neither could have imagined. "What are you thinking?" Lyra asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "That sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most perfect destinations," he replied, drawing her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of shared tomorrows. That I and the years that followed, the tale of the prince, the princess, the guard captain, and the maid would be told throughout both kingdoms, a story of courage, of love, and of the remarkable power of truth to transform even the most entrenched traditions. And when Adrian and Lyra's first child was born, a daughter with her mother's dark hair and her father's determined spirit, she was welcomed with equal joy by commoners and nobility alike, living proof that the true strength of any kingdom lies not in rigid adherence to the past, but in the brave reimagining of its future.